A police car lay crushed at the foot of the ridge, and inside, Officer Caleb Reed, barely breathing, his life slipping away in the frozen dark. But that night, in the snow-choked silence of whispering pines, what seemed like an accident was only the beginning of something far darker than anyone could imagine. Somewhere beneath that storm hid a secret, one powerful enough to destroy reputations, break families, and test the limits of courage itself. Stay with me for just 1 minute, and I'll tell you what really happened in those woods. The night a child, a veteran, and a dog changed everything. If stories of loyalty and quiet bravery still mean something to you, join us. Subscribe to Healing with Max. And before the snow melts, tell me, how does this story make you feel? I hope your day is gentle and your heart stays warm. The first snow of December came softly, like the world had forgotten how to make noise. Whispering pines lay wrapped in silver silence, its rooftops sagging under powdered white, its narrow roads fading into the hush of dawn. The air carried the clean scent of pine and the faint, smoky memory of fires burning in distant cabins. Even the wind seemed reluctant to disturb the calm, brushing gently through the tall trees as though afraid of waking something that still slept beneath the frost. Down the narrow trail behind the old sawmill, Samuel Cole moved carefully, his small boots crunching with rhythmic patience. At 8 years old, he was a slender boy with pale cheeks and a quiet concentration that made him seem older. A thick wool coat swallowed his frame, the sleeves too long for his thin arms. Beneath that coat, a small wooden arm, carved and sanded smooth by his father, creaked faintly with each swing, a metronome of resilience. Each step left a pair of uneven prints in the snow, one sure, one shallow, but both steady. Raymond Cole had told him that learning to walk this way wasn't about strength, it was about trust. And Samuel, despite everything, trusted the trail. Ahead trotted Max, the German shepherd who moved like an old soldier, disciplined, precise, and aware of every shadow. His sable coat shimmered faintly under the pale morning light, streaks of silver tracing along his back and muzzle. His breath rose in soft clouds, his movements calm but always ready. Raymond said Max was more than a therapy dog. He was a guardian with instincts that age had only sharpened. 10 winters had not dulled his purpose. If anything, they had honed it. They had taken this trail every morning since Raymond's therapy began. The veteran, a man whose once powerful legs now carried pain through every step, had found solace in these woods, teaching his son how to trust uneven ground, while learning patience in return. But today, Raymond had stayed behind in the cabin, a wool blanket over his knees and the radio whispering some old country hymn. "Don't go too far, son," he had said. "Stay where you can still see the smoke from the chimney." Samuel had nodded, promising he would. The forest was beautiful that morning, wrapped in a peace that felt almost sacred. The world was all white and whisper. Samuel listened to the crunch of his boots, the crackle of ice beneath branches. He thought about how his father said snow made the world honest. It showed every track, every secret that tried to hide. He smiled at the thought, watching his breath bloom in the cold air. Then, a glint, something small, half buried near a drift ahead. The boy paused. Beneath the snow, a fragment of glass caught the light. Faintly blue, wrong somehow against the forest's natural palette. He crouched, curious. It wasn't ice. The edges were smooth, tinted like the glass of a car window. Samuel frowned, a little pulse of unease stirring in. his chest. Max had already noticed. His body stiffened, tail rising like a signal. He turned sharply toward the slope ahead, nose quivering. A low growl rumbled in his chest, deep, deliberate. "Max," Samuel whispered, voice swallowed by the cold. The dog took 3 steps forward, then froze. His ears pinned back, his gaze fixed down the embankment. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then Max barked, once, twice, sharp, commanding, urgent. Samuel startled, heart thudding. Max almost never barked like that. The sound cut through the hush like a warning bell. And suddenly, through the swirling snow, Samuel saw it. Something that didn't belong. Metal. Blue paint. The curve of a police car lying upside down in the ravine, half buried in ice and debris. Steam hissed faintly from the hood, mingling with the mist. He took a step closer, breath catching. The vehicle's wheels still spun weakly, creaking like wind chimes of steel. The insignia on the side was shattered but legible, Whispering Pines Sheriff's Department. His stomach dropped. Max barked again, shorter this time, like an order. Samuel followed, sliding down the bank, one hand gripping a branch for balance. The snow was slick. His wooden arm slipped against the bark with a hollow tap. When he reached the wreck, he stopped cold. Inside the car, a man lay slumped over the steering wheel. Blood had streaked across his temple, freezing into dark lines against the collar of his Navy uniform. The badge on his chest read, "Reed." His chest still moved, shallow, fragile, alive, but fading. Samuel's breath trembled. He had never seen someone broken like that. Not since the hospital where his mother had died, when the machines made the same weak rhythm he now saw in the man's chest. The world seemed to blur at the edges. Max let out a whine, pressing his muzzle to the broken glass, sniffing hard, his eyes reflecting a fierce intelligence. Then he turned back to Samuel and tugged at the boy's coat, not gently, but with insistence. He wanted Samuel to go. The boy hesitated, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't just leave him." But Max's gaze was firm, his bark cutting through again, no longer just a sound, but a command. Somewhere deep in that sound, Samuel heard his father's voice too, the tone Raymond used when fear wasn't an excuse. He nodded once, face pale. "Okay, boy. Okay." Then he turned and ran. Snow exploded beneath his boots, flying in frantic bursts as he sprinted through the trees. His lungs burned. His breath tore like fabric. The cold stabbed through his chest, but he didn't stop. His wooden arm swung wildly with each stride, creaking in rhythm with his heartbeat, fear, hope, and duty tangled into one desperate motion. Behind him, Max followed for a while, then slowed. His instincts tugged him back toward the wreck. The shepherd stopped at the tree line, body taut, ears angled toward the crash, sight. Samuel stumbled into the clearing where the forest thinned. Through the trees, he saw it, the faint glow of home. The cabin light flickered golden against the storm, the chimney smoke curling steady and sure. He let out a cry that was half sob, half relief. He pushed himself harder, slipping on ice, scrambling up the small rise toward the door. Every muscle screamed, but he could already picture his father, calm, capable Raymond, rising from his chair, grabbing his coat, moving like the Marine he used to be. Everything would be all right, once he told him. But then, silence. Samuel looked back. The wind had softened, but Max's footsteps were gone. The clearing behind him was empty except for drifting snow. And then it came. A single bark, low and hollow, echoing through the forest, like a warning that came too late. It was the kind of sound that didn't fade when the echo died. Samuel froze, his breath clouding in the dark. The world seemed to lean closer, listening. Then he turned and ran the last few steps home, heart hammering as that echo chased him through the storm, a promise that what they had found in the ravine was only the beginning. The sound came before the door even opened. The bark Raymond Cole would never mistake. Not fear, not warning, but the kind that made a soldier drop his coffee and stand without thinking. The mug hit the table and rolled, its contents bleeding dark across the wood. His spine straightened on instinct older than pain, and for a moment, the cabin no longer smelled of pine and ash, but of desert wind and adrenaline. Then the door crashed open. Max lunged through first, his fur clotted with snow, eyes sharp and alive. Behind him, Samuel stumbled in, breath ragged, cheeks pale beneath the red flush of cold. His wooden arm swung stiffly, tapping against his side like a signal. He tried to speak, but could only point toward the forest, his mouth opening soundlessly before the words caught on air. Raymond didn't need words. He saw fear mapped across his boy's face and knew it like a terrain he had already survived. Jacket, boots, flashlight. The movements came back smooth as muscle memory. He grabbed the first aid kit from the wall, the one that hadn't been opened since Afghanistan, and slipped it under his arm. "Stay close," he said, though his voice sounded like someone else's. Low, clipped, too steady for what he felt. Minutes later, the old Chevy growled to life, coughing smoke into the frozen air. Tires spun against black ice, finding grip only after a second that felt like forever. Samuel sat beside him, flashlight clutched tight, while Max stood in the bed of the truck, ears erect, staring into the white wilderness as if charting coordinates. The world outside was blinding, snow whipping sideways, the trees bending beneath wind that howled through them like voices from another time. The ravine appeared without warning, a jagged wound carved into the earth. Steam rose faintly from below. Raymond cut the engine, his breath fogging the windshield, and climbed out. The snow crunched under his boots, loud as breaking glass. He took one look at the wreck and his shoulders set. The kind of silence only men who've seen too much can wear. The car was upside down, the sheriff's department emblem fractured but visible. He slid down the embankment, one gloved hand steadying against the ice, his knees biting with old pain he refused to notice. Inside the wreck, a man hung limply against the seatbelt, blood crusted at his hairline, the pale skin of his throat pulsing faintly. "Airway clear," Raymond muttered, voice detached, hands already moving, pulse weak. He worked with precision that came from years of patching lives that didn't always make it home. His fingers checked the wound, adjusted the man's head, wiped away the blood freezing across the collar. "You're okay, officer. Stay with me." Samuel knelt nearby, holding the flashlight with both hands. The beam trembled, throwing fractured light across the windshield. Every flicker seemed to bring the man's face into focus. Young, maybe 30, with short, dark hair and a jawline that would have looked defiant if not for the color draining from it. His name tag caught the light. Caleb Reed. "Dad, is he?" Samuel began, voice thin. "He's alive," Raymond answered, though he didn't look up. "Help me unbuckle him." Together they worked, one steady, one trembling. The seatbelt jammed halfway, frozen in the latch. Raymond yanked his pocket knife free, slicing through it with one swift motion. The man slumped forward. Max was there instantly, front paws against the door, Barking once, sharp, as if volunteering strength. They pulled him free, Raymond taking the shoulders while Samuel steadied the legs. The officer was heavier than he looked, dead weight against the snow. Each step back up the slope was a battle. Wind tore at their clothes, the ground shifting under ice. Raymond's breath came in rough bursts, but he never slowed. He had carried men through worse storms than this, though not with his son watching. At the top, he opened the truck door and laid the man across the back seat. Max jumped in after, curling his body against the wounded officer's side. The shepherd's fur bristled, then settled as he pressed closer, his eyes half closed in concentration, as if sheer warmth and loyalty could will a man back from the edge. Raymond covered them both with a wool blanket. "Hold him steady, boy," he said softly, then turned to his son. "Get in." Samuel climbed into the passenger seat, still clutching the flashlight like a talisman. His heart hammered as his father started the engine. The tires shrieked, caught, and the truck lurched forward, snow spinning in spirals behind them. As they climbed the road back toward the ridge, Raymond's gaze flicked briefly to the rearview mirror. Not at the man, but at something near the wreck. There, half buried in white, glinted a small metal toolbox, its lid cracked open, faintly red paint showing through frost. Not standard police issue, not civilian either. Something about the shape stirred an old unease in him, a memory of field kits that didn't belong to medics. He frowned, grip tightening on the wheel, but the thought passed. Survival came first. He pressed the accelerator. The truck roared, its headlights carving tunnels through the storm. Snow lashed against the windows. Samuel turned his face toward the glass, watching the forest blur into ghosts. Max didn't move, only breathed slow and heavy beside the officer, his body a living wall against the cold. And somewhere beyond the glow of their taillights, deep between the trees, a shadow shifted. Tall, deliberate, and still. The wind moved around it, carrying the faint clink of metal and the rhythm of a slow, measured breath. It didn't follow yet. It only watched. The storm swallowed the sound of the truck as it disappeared into the white. The sterile hum of the hospital replaced the roar of the storm. Pale light filtered through narrow windows, turning the snow outside into sheets of quiet silver. The scent of antiseptic hung in the air, faintly sharp, like cold steel. Officer Caleb Reed, 32, lay motionless under thin white sheets, the heart monitor beside him blinking with the rhythm of survival. Steady, fragile, defiant. Raymond Cole sat in the chair beside him, his heavy frame slouched forward, elbows on his knees. Shadows circled beneath his eyes like bruises left by time itself. Every breath he took seemed deliberate, as though he feared the room would crumble if he exhaled too loud. His hands, those broad, scar-lined hands, were clasped tightly, resting against a first-aid bandage still stained with someone else's blood. Across the small room, Samuel had fallen asleep, curled awkwardly in a waiting chair. His wooden arm rested gently on Max's back. The dog lay on the tile floor, muzzle between his paws, one ear twitching at every echo from the hallway. Even at rest, Max's body was coiled with alertness, the kind of vigilance only an old working dog carries, born from loyalty that no command can teach. When dawn came, the light changed, no longer harsh and sterile, but soft, diffused, almost forgiving. Raymond reached for the metal toolbox resting at his feet, the one he had picked up near the wreck before driving off. He flipped the latch open. Inside, rows of wrenches gleamed faintly beneath a thin crust of frost. A brake bleeder kit lay nestled among them, the tubing stiff with cold. one corner slick with dark, oily residue. He stared for a long time. Then his stomach clenched. These tools didn't belong in the back of a patrol car, and no officer would carry a brake bleeder caked in oil unless it had been used recently, and not for maintenance. Raymond's jaw tightened. Not an accident, he murmured under his breath. The realization hit like a returning wound. Someone had tampered with the vehicle, someone who wanted the crash to happen. The door creaked softly. A nurse entered, middle-aged, skin pale from the fluorescent lights, her name tag reading Janice. "He's stable for now," she whispered, adjusting the IV line. "Whatever you did out there, sir, you kept him alive." Raymond nodded but didn't answer. The compliment slid off him like water off cold metal. An hour later, Caleb stirred. His eyes fluttered open, hazel beneath the haze of morphine, and for a moment he seemed lost between dream and reality. His voice, when it came, was raw, scraped from the edge of pain. "They cut the lines," he said, every word dragging its weight through the room. "Harlow's men, from the trucking company, out by the quarry. I was getting too close." Raymond leaned in, his expression sharpening, every muscle of his jaw tense. The name hit like a memory. Victor Harlow, a man with charm polished to a shine, who smiled in every newspaper photo beside local politicians, who shook veterans' hands at charity events and signed checks with the other. Raymond had met him once at a town fundraiser, all teeth, cologne, and lies dressed as generosity. Caleb swallowed, his throat trembling. "He runs everything out there," he whispered. "Shipments, cover-ups. I had proof. I was taking it in that night." His words broke, but his eyes, even half-lidded, burned with defiance. Raymond reached out, steadying the IV drip. "Rest now, son," he said quietly. "You've done enough for tonight." Caleb exhaled, eyelids sinking, surrendering to sleep like a soldier collapsing after the last stand. The room fell still again. Only the monitor beeped, slow, patient, eternal. Raymond looked down at the toolbox, at the smallest wrench inside, its edge tinted brown with dried brake fluid. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers, the cold metal pressed into his palm, leaving a faint, oily stain. It wasn't evidence yet, but it was truth, heavy and undeniable. He pocketed the wrench. That smell of burnt oil and betrayal lingered on his skin, too familiar to mistake. Once, long ago, betrayal had worn a uniform too. When morning rolled toward noon, he gathered his coat. Max stood instantly, nails clicking softly against the tile, stretching before falling in step beside him. Samuel stirred awake, rubbing his eyes, face pale but calm. "Is he going to be okay?" the boy asked. Raymond hesitated. "He's got a fight ahead," he said, then placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "But he's not alone." They left the hospital together. The air outside was gray, the sky swollen with low clouds that carried the echo of the night's storm. Snow fell again, gently this time. Not cruel, just persistent. The world looked clean, but Raymond knew better. Snow could hide blood, could muffle truth. As they reached the parking lot, Raymond's eyes scanned the street out of habit. Years of training never really left a man. He opened the truck door, and that's when Max froze, body low, hackles raised, a growl rumbling from deep within his chest. "Easy, boy," Raymond muttered, but his hand paused halfway to the door handle. Across the road, parked at the curb, a black sedan idled silently. Its headlights were off, its windows tinted. Pale exhaust puffed from the tailpipe in steady rhythm, like breathing. Max's growl deepened, steady, warning, unblinking. Raymond felt it too, that prickle at the base of the neck that never lies. He straightened slowly, his reflection faint in the glass. Snow fell between them in slow, deliberate flakes, as if time itself wanted to hold its breath. The sedan didn't move. Neither did he. Only Max's growl carried through the quiet, low, and certain. The sound of a promise that the storm, in truth, had never really ended. That night, Whispering Pines was too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums just beneath the skin, where every crackle of the fire and sigh of the wind feels like a warning. Outside, the forest was draped in white, soft, pure, and deceitful. Beneath that stillness, something waited. Inside the cabin, Raymond Cole sat by the window, sleeves rolled up, the dim lamplight catching the fine scratches on his old service pistol. Each motion was slow, deliberate. Oil on cloth, cloth on metal. The sound, soft and rhythmic, might have soothed another man, but for Raymond, it was remembrance, a way to keep the ghosts from growing too loud. By the fire, Samuel was bent over his sketch pad, the pencil whispering across the paper. He was drawing Max, capturing the shepherd's broad shoulders and tired, noble eyes. The boy's face glowed orange under the firelight, his concentration gentle, unaware of the danger inching closer through the cold. Max lay stretched near the door, head on his paws, the steady rise and fall of his chest the only movement in the room. Every few seconds, his ears twitched, turning toward something that wasn't yet sound. Raymond looked up once, toward the door, then back to his pistol. "Smells like snow's thickening," he muttered. Samuel didn't answer. He was lost in his drawing, the kind of focus only a child who still believes in safety can have. Then came it, the faintest crunch. One step, then another. The sound didn't belong to the house nor to the storm. It was heavier, measured. Raymond's shoulders straightened, Max's head lifted, ears slicing the silence. The air itself seemed to stop breathing. Another step, closer. Raymond's hand moved from the cloth to the gun, the old reflex slotting into muscle before thought could form. Max growled, deep, low, the kind that shakes through wood. Samuel's pencil froze mid-line, eyes darting up toward his father. "Get behind the table," Raymond said quietly. The doorknob turned once, slowly, testing, then again, harder. Max lunged to his feet, his growl sharpening to a snarl that made the air crack. The latch clicked. The door burst open, throwing in a gust of snow and two figures with it. Men in dark coats, faces half hidden beneath knit caps, breath fogging in the orange light. Their boots left wet scars on the floorboards. The taller one, lean with a scar cutting across his cheek, raised a gun with the casualness of someone who'd done it before. His voice was calm, practiced. "Mr. Harlow sends his regrets." It all happened in one breath. Max leapt, jaws closing on the man's wrist. The shot went wild, ripping through the oil lamp. The flame flared, then shattered, plunging the room into chaos and flickering light. Samuel dropped flat, arms over his head. Raymond's pistol barked once, sharp, final, the sound of training returning from another lifetime. The shorter intruder stumbled back, clutching his thigh, red blooming against the snow clinging to his coat. The second man fired again blindly, the bullet thudding into the wall inches above Raymond's shoulder. "Move!" Raymond barked. Max shifted, releasing the first man only long enough to lunge toward the next. But the surviving intruder bolted through the back door, leaving streaks of blood and the smell of fear in his wake. Silence returned as suddenly as it had left. The wounded man groaned on the floor, clutching his leg. the gun knocked far from reach. Max stood over him, chest heaving, teeth bared but silent now, waiting for a command that never came. Samuel crawled toward his father, trembling but unhurt. Raymond knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly, his tone more prayer than comfort. Minutes stretched. Then, sirens. Distant at first, then closer, wailing through the snow-laden air. Red and blue light flickered faintly across the frosted windows. Raymond exhaled, the first breath he'd taken without fear since the door opened. When the patrol vehicles arrived, Sheriff Dana Cross stepped out first. She was in her mid-40s, tall, built like someone who'd spent a lifetime walking into trouble others avoided. Silver streaks threaded through her black hair, and her brown coat was already dusted with snow. Her eyes, sharp, assessing, moved across the scene. The shattered lamp, the smoke, the wounded man on the floor, and the veteran standing calm with a gun still warm in his hand. She gave a small nod, half respect, half fatigue. "Looks like Harlow doesn't appreciate unfinished business," she said quietly, holstering her weapon. Raymond's lips curved in something close to a smile. Thin, hard-earned. "Neither do I." Deputies entered, cuffing the bleeding man and dragging him through the snow. He stumbled, leaving dark prints that the wind immediately began to erase. Just before they reached the cruiser, he turned his head toward the cabin, his eyes hollow but burning with a strange satisfaction. "You can't stop what's coming," he rasped. "Harlow's not done." The words hung there, heavy as the night itself. Outside, the sirens faded. The snow began again, soft and relentless, covering the blood before it cooled. Inside, Raymond stood by the window, Max beside him, both staring out into the dark where danger had come and would surely come again. Samuel slept against the couch, his sketchbook still open, a pencil line frozen mid-stroke, a picture of peace unfinished. Dawn crept over whispering pines like a bruise. Gray, cold, unhealed. The storm had passed, but the air still carried its edge. Raymond Cole drove the old Chevy down the frozen road, the windshield wipers scraping away what little light managed to cling to the glass. Beside him sat Officer Caleb Reed, his shoulder wrapped in bandages, face drawn but determined. He stared ahead with the stillness of a man who had already made peace with danger. Neither spoke much. The only sound was the engine's low growl and the faint rattle of metal, the small wrench Raymond had kept in his coat pocket. In the truck bed, Max stood tall, body balanced against the wind, his fur rippling, eyes locked on the horizon, as if the truth lay waiting there. The road turned toward the industrial outskirts of town, where Harlow Quarry and freight sprawled across the valley floor. As they approached, floodlights still glowed over rows of idling trucks, their chrome glinting under the pale dawn. From a distance, it looked ordinary. Men in reflective vests, clipboards in hand, machines humming with the rhythm of commerce. But Raymond saw what the surface tried to hide, the rigid postures, the too perfect calm of men rehearsing honesty. He parked behind a line of half-buried tires. The air tasted of oil and dust. Caleb inhaled slowly, jaw tightening. "He's here," he said. Raymond nodded once, eyes scanning the line of trailers. Max jumped down first, landing with a muted thud, paws sinking into frost. He sniffed the air, nose twitching, then moved with purpose between the rows. The shepherd's focus was sharp, almost electric. Each movement precise, each breath calculated. Raymond followed, keeping one hand near his coat pocket, where the cold metal of his sidearm waited. They passed workers who pretended not to stare. One man muttered something into a radio before slipping behind a truck. Raymond caught the motion, the exchange of glances. The mask of routine was cracking. Then Max barked. One sharp, commanding note that cut through the morning haze. He bolted toward a trailer at the far edge of the lot, its tarp pulled tight and rimmed with fresh frost. The shepherd clawed at the flap, teeth catching the canvas, tugging until it tore. Beneath the fabric were wooden crates stacked in neat rows, stamped with faded stencils that read, "Machine parts." Caleb climbed up, his breath steaming in the cold. He pried one crate open. Inside were rifles, polished, clean, the metal gleaming under the floodlight's pale glow. He froze for a second, then looked down at the label. Property of Whispering Pines Sheriff's Department. His throat tightened. "It's all here," he said quietly. Every shipment that went missing these past months. Raymond's gaze drifted over the rows of crates, the same kind of steel boxes he'd loaded once upon a time overseas. He'd thought he left this behind. A voice came from the shadows near the trailers, smooth, deep, rehearsed in power. "Impressive, Officer Reed," it said. "You found what wasn't meant to be found." Victor Harlow stepped into the light. Tall, mid-50s, dressed in a tailored overcoat too fine for the mud around him. His hair, black streaked with gray, was slicked back, and his smile held the gleam of a man too used to winning. "You should have stayed quiet," he hissed. "No one would have missed you." Raymond stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his boots, his coat still dusted from the storm. His eyes locked on Harlow's with the calm of a man who's seen death and stopped fearing it. "You made the mistake of thinking justice forgets," he said. The sound came before the words finished. Sirens, faint but growing. Red and blue lights flickered against the canyon walls, winding down the frozen road. Harlow's expression shifted, arrogance cracking at the edges. His men scattered like startled crows. Max barked again, circling to block the path to the nearest truck. Moments later, Sheriff Dana Cross arrived with her deputies, the cruisers fanning out in a blaze of light. Snow swirled in their headlights, painting the scene in shades of red, blue, and white. Harlow's empire began to crumble under the weight of flashing justice. Deputies pried open trailers, pulling out crates one after another, their contents undeniable. Cross approached Harlow, voice steady, eyes hard. "You've been running your mouth about honor for years, Victor. Guess you finally showed what it's worth." Harlow didn't answer. His smirk had vanished, replaced by the pale mask of exposure. As deputies cuffed his wrists, he muttered under his breath, voice bitter as rust. "This town forgets its heroes." Raymond watched in silence. He turned toward Max, who sat by his side, ears pricked, posture steady, a sentinel carved from loyalty itself. "Maybe," Raymond said softly, "but we don't do it to be remembered." As the cruisers pulled away, their sirens fading into the cold, Caleb turned back toward the last crate. He noticed something half buried beneath splinters, a small, rusted serial tag, no bigger than a matchbox. He wiped it clean with his thumb, eyes narrowing. There was a number etched there, old, worn, but legible. His voice came low. "Raymond, this tag. It matches the vehicle file from the accident. Your wife's crash." Raymond didn't speak for a long time. The wind whispered across the quarry, carrying the smell of iron and snow. The truth sat between them, heavy but cleansing. He finally exhaled, the sound soft, resigned. "Then it wasn't chance," he said. "Just a circle waiting to close." Max pressed against his leg, silent, warm, steady. Above them, the first light of morning broke through the gray clouds. Pale, fragile, but real. For the first time in years, Raymond didn't look away. Weeks passed, and winter began to loosen its grip. The sun returned to Whispering Pines like a visitor who had stayed away too long, tentative at first, then bright and forgiving. The town, once shadowed by storm and scandal, was stirring again. Snow still lined the rooftops, but it glittered now, not with menace, but with peace. Inside the town hall, warmth had replaced fear. The old wooden rafters, strung with bunting and flags, echoed with the low hum of voices, the rustle of uniforms, and the sound of hope, finding its way back into the room. Deputies, townsfolk, and families gathered shoulder to shoulder, their faces softened by pride. At the podium stood Officer Caleb Reed, his uniform crisp, his bandaged arm hidden neatly beneath the dark blue fabric. His voice, when he spoke, carried not the weight of authority, but the calm of someone who had seen truth and survived it. "Not all heroes wear badges," he said. His gaze drifted toward the front row. There sat Raymond Cole, coat pressed, shoulders square, eyes steady beneath the low light. A faint scar crossed his cheek now, a quiet reminder of the night Harlow's men came to his door. Beside him sat Samuel, dressed in a clean plaid shirt and new boots. His small wooden arm gleamed with fresh polish, and his other hand rested gently on the broad back of Max, who sat proudly at his feet. Max's fur was brushed smooth, his collar shining, though his posture was still that of a sentinel. His ears flicked at every sound, but his eyes stayed on Raymond, waiting, as if even here, in a hall filled with applause, his duty was not yet done. When the names were called, the audience rose. The mayor, a stout woman with kind eyes and silver hair, approached with a tray of medals glinting beneath the overhead lights. "For acts of valor and bravery," she announced, voice trembling with emotion. Raymond stood first. The applause swelled as the medal was pinned to his chest. Small, bronze, and understated, but it carried the gravity of everything he had done to hold the line. He nodded once. No speech, no gesture, only quiet acknowledgement. Then came Samuel. The boy stepped forward hesitantly, his breath catching at the sound of his name. A silver star was placed into his hand, the metal reflecting the hall's warm light. The crowd erupted again, and for the first time, Samuel didn't look down. He smiled, small, unsure, but real. And then, the hall fell silent for a moment. The mayor turned toward Max. "And to our guardian," she said, her voice softening. She reached down, attaching a round medallion to the dog's collar, engraved with words that shimmered faintly under the lights. "Guardian of Whispering Pines." The applause that followed was different, deeper, almost reverent. The sound filled every corner of the hall, rolling like wind through the mountains. Amid the cheering, Samuel leaned close, whispering into Max's ear, "You found him. You saved us. All." The shepherd turned his head slightly, pressing his muzzle against the boy's wooden arm. The touch was gentle, instinctive, a silent reminder that even what's broken can still protect. When the ceremony ended, the crowd lingered, talking softly, shaking hands. Caleb caught Raymond's gaze across the room and gave a small, knowing nod. The kind of gesture that didn't need words. Two men acknowledging a story that would never be printed in papers, but would live quietly in the hearts of those who mattered. Outside, the afternoon light had faded to a soft gray. Snow began to fall again, thin flakes drifting slowly through the still air, each one dissolving the past inch by inch. Raymond stepped out onto the stone steps of the town hall. The cold met him gently, like an old friend. Max walked at his side, tail low, head high. Samuel ran ahead, leaving small, uneven footprints that the snow quickly softened. The town below glowed faintly. Smoke from chimneys, yellow light through windows, life returning to its rhythm. Raymond paused, his gloved hand resting on Max's back. For the first time in years, he didn't feel haunted. The ghosts had quieted, their echoes replaced by something warmer, gratitude, perhaps, or the peace that follows when justice finally breathes again. He looked out across whispering pines, the snow falling like a benediction, and spoke softly, not to anyone, but to the world that had given him another chance. Sometimes, he said, the bravest hearts don't beat for glory. They beat quietly, for those they refuse to lose. Some stories don't end when the danger fades. They settle into the quiet, in the spaces between breaths, in the warmth of a hand resting on a loyal friend's back. And if you listen closely, you can still hear them. The soft echo of courage that never needed an audience. Loyalty is like that. It doesn't shout. It simply stays. It waits through the long nights, through the storms that test who we are. And it reminds us that the truest strength often walks beside us on four legs, or sits quietly by the fire, asking for nothing. Some hearts are built for noise, for glory, for applause. But others, the rare ones, carry their bravery in silence. They stand guard when the world sleeps. They forgive, they protect, and they love without needing to be seen. So if tonight feels too quiet, if the world seems distant and cold, remember there are still guardians out there. People and souls who keep the light from going out, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough to make this world a little kinder.